In this edition of Leading in Uncertainty, a CEO perspective, we are extremely grateful to have with us Sigvart Voss Eriksen, CEO of TAPAD. Now, TAPAD is a fast-growing company in the industry of digital advertising on the internet and world-leading provider for digital cross-device identity. Now, TAPAD achieved 60% revenue growth year-on-year in 2019. TAPAD and Sigvart are headquartered out of New York. I've known Sigvart now for 8 years since our time in Bangkok together, and we and our family have remained close friends ever since. Amazing, Sigvart, to have you on board. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me, and great to see you again as well.
Great to see you. So let's jump into it. So first question, New York City, that's where you are based and that's where your company is based. But tell us a bit about that. I mean, that's the epicenter of this pandemic in America. So many deaths. So what's it like? What's it like in New York?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are just staggering. Fortunately, it's kind of plateauing as we speak, but it's been brutal. And look, we usually live on Manhattan in the city. Right now, though, we rented a house upstate. We're fortunate enough and privileged enough to be able to do that. Because the city has been under lockdown now for about 6 more. We're in the 7th week. And yeah, as I said, it's been pretty tough in the city as such. And we did a city run in the weekend. We went back to the apartment, and I have to say it was quite bizarre to be there. I mean, the streets were empty, very few cars, very few people. The ones you saw, most of them would be wearing masks, which, by the way, now is mandatory. If you can't keep or adhere to the social distancing rules, you have to have a face mask. And people were lined up for the grocery store around the block where we live, and 6 feet apart, everyone with mask, and all the way around wrapped around the block. It was it was strange. And in Central Park, as you might have seen in the news, they've built up this this tent hospital.
I've seen so much on CNN and some other news channels. And what came to mind is this movie, I Am Legend, which stars Will Smith. And that sees the streets of New York as well empty because of another catastrophe. I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime, but look at what we're seeing now.
Huh? Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, you would the only times you would see traffic or such empty streets would be sort of during holidays, but even then you would see more people out than what I observed in the weekend. And well, it's hopefully we can, or hopefully at least the city has turned the page now, but we'll see. We got to be vigilant to keep the numbers down.
Let's hope on that. So let's maybe shift to business. How's business been during this pandemic?
Yeah. Well, for us, all things considered, it's been relatively good. You mentioned in your intro, we're part of the advertising ecosystem, or digital advertising ecosystem. So we are as such exposed to the level of spend in digital advertising, and as you've probably seen, there has been an industry-wide decline. There is softness towards the end of last quarter and going into this. And a lot of businesses out there are struggling. So for us, our model is generally a licensing model, which means that we're not so immediately kind of exposed, but we do feel it. And some clients are asking for different kinds of alleviation, be it payment terms, discounts, etc., which hurts our short-term financials. But fortunately for us, we came out of a really fantastic Q1, so we have a bit of a war chest to help us through in the short term, at least. Yeah.
Right. So you have what, approximately 100 plus employees to manage in your team?
Correct. Yeah.
And so how is that? How is engagement going? What are you guys doing to manage through this type of these times?
Yeah. First of all, we're all working from home now. We have offices in New York, in Oslo, Norway, in London, UK, and in Tokyo, in Japan. And we were pretty early in terms of closing our offices. And so everyone has been working from home the last 7 weeks. And look, we're fortunate because we can. I mean, our business is all in the cloud, so we didn't have any excuse, if you may, when we started this discussion. So we were pretty aggressive in just asking people to stay home, and we haven't. I kind of feel we're still maintaining productivity, so we haven't really missed the beat there. But having said that, I mean, it has completely upended our routines. I mean, we would have town halls every 6 weeks with the management. Now we turned up the frequency to every week, and we have these fireside chats where we talk about the business and also about personal stuff, because I feel it. I think our employees feel it. We get a lot of feedback that people are anxious for good reason, right? The economy is sputtering. People are having friends, families that are being laid off, etc. So we run our stand-ups with the teams once or twice every week, and then on the more lighter note, we've also been experimenting with sort of replicating some of our more social events, like happy hours, collaboration lunches, etc. Where obviously we have to bring our own food and drinks. And I have to say, some of these things, they work, some don't. It's kind of awkward to, you have your beer bottle and you try to, cheers, clunk in the screen,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Look, you've been, as you said, working from home for a long time. What does that look like? Is it more busier than actually physically going to the office, or less? What's your take on how busy you've been?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say kind of yes and no. So on the one hand, of course, things are kind of upside down. We have the kids at home. They've started homeschooling, but it's just a different, obviously, office environment in that sense. And but for me, it's given some more time, I guess, for production in terms of writing, reflection, etc. I find that our regular meetings are pretty similar, as we were used to having at least a couple of people on Zoom, even in when we're still in the office, because we have these remote locations. What I miss most, and I think that I'm not alone in that, is really on the social front, and I think we lose out some on that, and the ad hoc meetings, the brainstormings, those kind of off the cuff discussions, that they're essentially gone, because it's not the same to slack someone. You try to compensate, but it's a very different thing to be face to face.
Right. I agree. I think an organization as well, there's a lot of social interaction, social network that is so important. Whether it's formal or informal, it's still so important. And you did touch on, just now, you touched on the anxieties that people are feeling. And you tend to try to bring that out. And look, you've done a lot of writing, and I read an article of yours, and that was dated on the 21st of March. And in that article, you wrote, when there are dilemmas all around, transparency, decency, and kindness is the best guide when in doubt. So talk us through that. What is that? Why is that?
So maybe I can exemplify it, because I mean, we're living through this time of uncertainty now, and here in the US, you see a lot of this has unfortunately been politicized, and you see this contrast, at least I do, in the sense, you have the federal leadership and these daily press conferences is being held by the federal task force. And then as a contrast, we have our governor, the New York state governor, Cuomo, who is doing the same. He has every day he's doing a press conference, and he's become kind of a national phenomenon in those, because he's been very transparent, and he's been extremely brutal in talking about facts and what's really going on. But it's also been decent. He's not been lashing out and so on. And I would say he's really shown some statesmanship. And this is a guy who wasn't really that popular, honestly, but he's kind of stepped up to the plate. So people tune in to listen to him because there is trust. He doesn't mince words. He tells it as it is, and that I think means a lot when people are uncertain. You can kind of accept a lot of bad stuff being said, as long as it's done when with the right intent, and people understand that, look, you give me the brutal facts, at least I can relate to that, right?
Yeah.
And I think in crisis there is need for tough and resolute decisions, but that doesn't stop us from being kind and decent in the execution of those.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the ones who have the toughest jobs these days, the frontline workers, doctors, nurses, funeral homes, it's been completely clogged. I mean, they were digging up parks here in New York, right? It's been really crazy.
Yeah.
Delivery personnel, mailmen, and so on and so forth. All of those need kindness.
Yeah.
They need appreciation, and we've seen that in the city. It's amazing. Every single evening at 7 p.m. You'll hear people, or people will come out on their balconies, open their windows. They'll be banging pots and clapping and whistling, and that is essentially the citizens of New York coming out to pay tribute to those frontline workers. Now, you can imagine, you wake up every morning, and as a nurse or a doctor, you know that you're walking into what is essentially putting your health and life on the line, and that kind of appreciation every evening, that does something with us all. I mean, those, for them, it's appreciation. For us, it's a sense of showing solidarity. So even we do that. I mean, with the kids, we're upstate now. There's no audience, but it's still it feels good, and it's about instilling some of that feeling with the kids as well. So.
And so that's the kind of as you said, transparency, decency, and kindness that you want to also replicate in the organization as well, right?
Yeah, correct.
Putting the same theme in there. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's probably the right time to shift to leadership and what kind of leadership behaviors that we need to show during this time of uncertainty, this time of crisis. And you've coined a very, very interesting term. I've actually not heard enough of this in this side of the world. Organizational empathy. Organizational empathy. So could you tell us a bit more about organizational empathy?
Yeah, so the thinking around that is that, I genuinely believe, and there's a lot of books and research, talking about empathy as a key trait for a leader and colleague, for that matter. The ability to understand, empathize with your employees and colleagues is a measure of how successful you can be in an organization over time. And time is an essential piece there. If you look at, Jim Collins, the good old, management book, Good to Great, who I guess a lot of us have read. He talks about level 5 leadership, about those leaders who are genuinely able to empathize with the organization and kind of stay humble even in days of amazing success, and that they are the ones that sort of consistently over time will thrive. And I've seen that in practice. I mean, I've been now operating in different countries, and this is culture in independent, in my opinion, that truly exceptional leaders typically have a great degree of empathy. There are exceptions. I mean, though, you have the visionaries that swing a big hammer, but they are, they're not most of us. That's the less than 1% who have the ability to pull something like that off. For most of us, we need to play on different strengths and be able to to get our organization with us. So in TAPAD, we've sort of been curious whether empathy can be institutionalized, go beyond one single individual or a single leader. And by definition, an organization has no feelings. It has no memory, no empathy.
Yep.
People have, right? So is it possible then to organize that a set of values in an organization and institutionalize it? And that's what we've been talking about, or what we've been working on. And I think that's what I mean with organizational empathy, is that when you actually are able to put and instill that into a system and into the organization. And there are ways of doing that. Some of the tools is as a team and as a leader, to be better listener, act on feedback, and then encourage delegation, not only of responsibility, but also authority. And I believe we've sort of successfully started this journey, at least, and proven that it's possible. But we still have a long way to go as individual leaders, but also as a team. But it's been good. I think in crisis like these, that's when having set some of this into system and motion, it can really pay off.
Right. When I think of New York, where you are, I think of Wall Street. And when I think of Wall Street, I think of those movies that we have seen. The movie Wall Street, Michael Douglas playing Gordon Gekko. Most recently, Leonardo DiCaprio in The Wolf of Wall Street playing Jordan Belfort. Now, those guys were thriving on ruthlessness and, making money when there's blood on the street. We're now talking about empathy, a totally different concept. And in fact, you believe in paying it forward as well as a concept. What's paying it forward about?
Well, first of all, it's an awesome movie. So,
I love it.
Yeah. And look, those Gordon Geckos, they exist. I mean, I live in the city. I see them. They do exist. And some are really successful. Some are not, right? And if you count your success in monetary terms, for sure you'll find them on Manhattan. And you'll find those people. I have chosen to surround myself with people who have a very different value set, and they also exist. They and I think they are. There are much more of them in New York, fortunately, in my mind, anyway. I believe in intrinsic motivation, and the need, to set the needs of the team ahead of your own, and that is essentially the concept of paying forward. If you have a truly talented pool of individuals in your organization, I believe that to get truly exceptional performance, again, over time, beyond the monetary rewards, you have to make an environment of trust.
Yeah.
And that trust that, it will pay off to work hard, to cooperate, and not the least, and this is one of the key things, is to make the other team members successful. When we eventually walk into the office, and I don't know, who knows when that's going to be next time, but, you walk in the morning, and the question is, what is your intent? Do you genuinely seek to make your colleagues successful? Or are you in it only to win for yourself? And I think the difference between those kind of entitled superachievers who only think of themselves and those real team players who are motivated by collective success, it is really what makes the difference for a superachieving organization over time. You can be lucky in moments of time and pull off extraordinary stuff. But if you really truly want exceptional performance consistently over time, that's where I believe, paying forward and being able to instill some of that organizational empathy is crucial.
Right. So look, I mean, empathy in the organization, trying to get your team talent up, all these good stuff. Mm-hmm. But you're in a hotspot. You're the CEO of the organization, and I've been there. Right. At the end of the day, business counts. So how do you keep that balance? Because again, I quote what you wrote in another article. Organizational empathy does not equate to softness. On the contrary, in tough times, tough decisions need to be made. How do you keep that balance?
Well, I guess what I'm referring to or referred to there is that the fact that when things really start to go south, there are tough decisions that need to be made. And, we've been very successful over the past period now, but that is on the back of a period where we had to go through rifts, and, we reduced the company by almost 25% in a turnaround when I joined. And right now, companies around us all over the world are they're forced to furlough and lay off people in large numbers, and you can't wait. If your business is going under, you need to do what needs to be done. The thing is, though, and how you do it, and when you have to make these calls, and in particular, your concern is going to be how you keep the go forward team motivated. And one thing that I've learned is when you come to a decision, let's say if it's kind of the ultimate bad thing in a company is a layoff. If you've come to the decision that this just has to be done, one is to from the time you actually announce it until everyone knows whether or not they have a job, and how you execute on that, minimizing that time. I've basically said that nobody should spend more than 24 hours between an announcement and then knowing what how it impacts them as a person, because the productivity is going to be an absolute function of how you as a leader in an organization dealt with them. That is dealing with the go forward team, but they, it's their friends and colleagues are just been put on the street. So, how you deal with them and is a big deal. So my experience is that people have a tendency to accept what they deem an unfair conclusion if the process is deemed fair, if how they're treated is deemed fair. So people, generally have a much, much harder time to getting over an unfair process.
Yep.
So a dose of empathy is more about how you execute, good listening skills, honesty, adaptability, and execution will make for so much better implementation, even in the toughest of decisions. So, in this, I don't see a contrast. It's actually complementary to have a large dose of empathy, even in the toughest of times.
I can 100% agree. I think what you say is transparency, decency, kindness, organizational empathy is going to be critical while we go through such crisis, and therefore people get to accept these tough decisions. Tough decisions have to be made, but people are going to be able to be accepting it because they have to be treated fairly, right? Be treated fairly. So now let's jump to the future. We spoke about visionaries and they can predict a bit what's going to happen. So what's your take on what's going to be the new normal for business moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question.
You have the crystal ball.
I would love for you to tell me. Yeah?
The crystal ball needs to come out.
Exactly. I don't have one here, but look, I think there are a couple of things that is clear, right? So work from home policies have been brute forced into almost every industry right now. So that will not go away. I don't think, we'll reopen the offices, but that is to reopen into a new reality with new policies from a HR and work environment perspective. So I think all companies have really gotten a rude awakening and have by now, either found ways of making this effective, or they won't be effective as an organization even post this. So whatever resistance there might have been, to remote office policies, etc., that has been shattered. So that is one, real difference I think we will see in our new normal, if you may. The other thing which is interesting is that, retail has been forced digitized, and especially the elderly have gotten a brutal crash course in digitalization. I mean, my mom is buying grocery online now. I mean, she wouldn't have thought, she wouldn't have thought the thought only 2 months ago. I really doubt that retail, healthcare, education, transport will ever be the same again. Of course, there will be a shift back to somewhat closer to what we were used to, but definitely, that whole digitization process and innovation around that has been accelerated by probably 5 years at least, if not more. So, and I guess, one thing which I think is kind of funny to think about is what is going to be, how are those awkward moments going to be, when people want to shake your hand or give you a hug? Are we going to be elbow bumping forever,
That's right.
There we go. Virtual elbow bump.
Virtual elbow.
And I just, think about your kids, I thought about mine. Are they going to look back at us, those future generations looking back at us as those dirty cavemen who, were hugging, handshaking and all of that, even people they didn't know. Look, I hope not. I want to go back to that. I think it's part of humanity. At least for me, it is. But who knows? I mean, we might have to keep this distance for a while longer, and it will definitely change our cultural norms. That's for sure.
It changes, as you say, working from home, e-commerce, the shift into digitalization, as well as then the social norms. Big changes ahead.
Yeah.
So finally, Sigvart, any last words, any last advice for the people who will be watching this?
Well, right now, stay home. Listen to the facts, and that especially goes for the US audience. And look, enjoy the family time while you can. That's it's important in times like this, and have some fun. Remember that we'll get through this somehow, some shape or form, and in the meanwhile, let's have a good laugh.
Yeah. Amazing. Sigvart, thank you so much for your time. It was awesome.
Likewise, it was a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, and it was great to see you again.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.